This is important to say here that this consultation is a shared space, and we look forward to your active and valuable participation in the deliberation, in the reflections, and I hope that this discussion is not just a discussion, but a step towards policy change, towards a real solution, and let us discuss to move this discussion to action. So by the end of the day, we will have some concrete, actionable outcomes. So with that hope, I once again welcome you all, and may I now request Shalini Sinha ji, you all must be knowing. She is heading Vigo for the Asia region, and she is head of strategic planning and partnership. I may be wrong, so she can she can correct me later. Please have your seat. So Shalini ji has two roles here. So one role is to also take us to the recommendations and findings of the research that is going to be released. And second role is also to moderate or say facilitate the discussion and reflections on the report presentation. So may I also request Bharti Birla ji to come on the dais. Bharti Birla ji is an international development professional working presently with the International Labour Organization, and she is looking at enterprise development, and she provides technical support to 7 countries, India and its neighboring countries. Welcome, Bharti ji. We also have Vivek Jaiswal, but I think he is not here. He is from NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, so he may be joining us soon. So I also welcome Mr. Dipender Kapoor ji on the dais. Dipender Kapoor ji is linked with Climate Center for Cities and National Institute of Urban Affairs, NIUA as we all call it. And he is a senior development and WASH expert leading the sanitation capacity building platform at the National Institute of Urban Development. He has worked in leadership positions and national and international development organizations, including heading WaterAid India. So welcome, Dipender ji. We also have Shanti Devi ji. Shanti Devi ji, आपका स्वागत है, आ जाइए मंच पर. शांति देवी जी हमारे साथ जुड़ी हुई एक स्ट्रीट वेंडर हैं, और ये गर्मियों के दिनों में, आजकल के दिनों में इन्होंने फिर शुरू कर दिया है. लोटस टेम्पल अगर आप घूमने जाएंगे तो लोटस टेम्पल के ठीक सामने अगर बहुत ज़्यादा आप गर्मी से परेशान हो रहे हो तो शांति जी खीरा, ककड़ी, जितने भी लोकल, रीजनल, सीजनल और सस्ती सब्जियां हैं वो खिलाती हैं और लोगों को गर्मी से बचाती हैं, और फिर वो लोटस टेम्पल में जाकर वो शांति का अनुभव करते हैं.
We can open it now. Yes. Shanti ji, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you have the agenda.
So I'll begin now with presenting the report that we have just released, and may I call my colleague Rituraj to share the presentation with me, as he has also shared the work with us and led us on this research that we did last year in the summers. Yeah, so Rituraj, please start. Before Rituraj starts, I want to begin by thanking all those street vendors who have participated in this research, thanking Jan Pehal who have facilitated this, and all the grassroots workers of Jan Pahal. Some of them are here, who have facilitated this field work that we were able to do with the help of Jan Pahal grassroots workers. So before we begin, before we present, we really want to thank you. आप सबका धन्यवाद करना चाहते हैं जिन्होंने इस रिसर्च में, शोध में हमारा साथ दिया, फील्ड में हमारे साथ गए, और वो स्ट्रीट वेंडर्स जिन्होंने इसमें पार्टिसिपेट करा और अपनी बात को बहुत खुल के बोला. सो आप सबका धन्यवाद.
Thank you so much, Shamini. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today and for your continued engagement and support. The purpose of this presentation is to share the key findings of our research on climate change and urban informal economy, heat stress, and street vendors in Delhi. Through this, we hope to provide a clearer picture of how climate-related risks are affecting informal workers and in their everyday lives and livelihood. We also hope this presentation will help us think more concretely about the findings and what it means for urban policy, planning, and climate-responsive strategies in Delhi, and especially from the perspective of climate justice and inclusion. Just to give you a quick overview of informal employment in cities, climate change, we know, is the global phenomenon, but it impacts are felt mostly sharply in cities, and Delhi is a very strong example of that. And according to UN data, UN Habitat data, 64% of the population faces high exposure to disaster. But when we bring this closer to home, we can see how we can, how relevant this is for Delhi. And Delhi is already experiencing climate stress, whether in the form of extreme heat or heavy rainfall or flooding. And in Delhi, around 76% of the urban employment is informal. This means that the majority of the people are working in the city are outside formal employment status, and they often lack social protection, secure workplaces, and stable incomes. Just to again give you a quick overview of our research overview, the slides we are trying to show here that apart from generating evidence, our research aims to strengthen policy and advocacy at the local, national, and global level. And our central concern is ensuring that the experiences of and needs of informal workers are fully recognized in climate debates. This work spans across 3 countries, Thailand, India, and Brazil, with 3 occupational groups: street vendors, home-based workers, and waste pickers. And in Delhi, we are doing this with street vendors and home-based workers. And this research has a 2-pronged approach. We are combining phone-based surveys and key interviews, informal interviews. So basically, the project seeks to connect.
No, go ahead. Just close the door.
Seeks to connect evidence with global policy conversations on climate justice, and by doing so, we aim to influence how adaptation and mitigation are framed, and also ensure that informal workers who are central to urban informal economy are yet highly vulnerable are no longer invisible in climate policy processes. In Delhi, we are seeing more frequent intense heat waves, unseasonal rainfall, and serious waterlogging during heavy rains. And the summer of 2024 was the hottest on record, with temperature crossing at 45 degrees Celsius in several regions of the city. And now imagine this experience, experiencing that not from inside an office or a home, but standing outdoors on a pavement or a footpath for 8 to 10 hours a day. So street vending is one of the most visible forms of informal work in Delhi, and across India it employs around 16.5 million people, which is about 3% of the country's workforce. And in Delhi, roughly 9% of workers are engaged in street vending. And these vendors are directly exposed to climate stress, Extreme heat affects their health and productivity. Sudden rain or flooding damage their goods. Waterlogging prevents customers from reaching them, and in many cases, a single day of disruption means the complete, loss of income. So this research again is conducted in partnership with JNPHL and Seva Delhi, and basically overall we are trying to look at what does climate justice look like for those who are most exposed, yet most essential in this city. A quick research overview and objectives about the research. We are trying to address a research gap here. Like while climate change impacts on informal settlements are studied, its effects on informal employment remain under researched and absent from key climate governance processes. And also a worker-focused inquiry with surveys, focus groups, and interviews with home-based workers and street vendors in Delhi, and we are trying to document impacts and coping strategies. About the objectives, firstly, we are trying to monitor and make visible the impacts of climate change on urban informal workers, to understand workers' current coping and adaptation strategies and how to enhance them, and strengthen worker movements policy and advocacy at local, global, and national levels, and inform key local and global advocacy processes. This is a quick overview of the methodology we have used to monitor baseline conditions and impacts in Delhi. We began by preparing a very detailed list of respondents well in advance and inviting them to participate at specific times and locations. And each survey session started with a very clear introduction of what our objectives are, what is the process is going to look like, and we also issued a heat advisory given the context of extreme temperatures in Delhi. And the surveys were conducted in a very controlled and supervised manner. We were present there, our partners were there supporting, and we did it in markets, in open spaces, public parks, partners' offices, and informal work locations. And in addition to the interviews, we carried out key informant interviews with experts to sort of deepen our understanding of local dynamics, and we comprehended this with infrastructure mapping, which is again another crucial part of our research. This is our sample and coverage in Delhi. We did again baseline and impact baseline during March, which is 25th March to 9th of April, when there was not much heat. And then again we went back in July, where there was peak summer, 8th July to 18th of July. And we covered 17 markets in both baseline and impact rounds. And for the second phase of the survey, which is the impact phase, we deliberately went back to the same set of workers we had interviewed during the baseline. So this is sort of a longitudinal approach, and which it's really important for the kind of questions we are asking, because instead of treating the two rounds as sort of snapshots with different people, it sort of allowed us to follow the same individuals over time. Demographics of the sample. Overall 4 in 10 vendors, this is in our sample, overall 4 in 10 vendors are women. Almost half, which is 46%, are between the age of 36 and 55. And goods sold with food vendors 46%, non-food vendors 41%, and services 13%. So this is again infrastructure mapping, which was a very crucial part of our research. How we did it is basically, we wanted to go beyond the survey process and actually understand the physical conditions in which street vendors in Delhi are working. So alongside the survey, we conducted detailed site level mapping across selected markets, which is across 17 markets. And basically this mapping focused on the overall condition of the vending site, including access to water, electricity, sanitation, and shade. We also looked at whether the space had any formal recognition of vending space, vending zone, and we did site visits along with it, photographic documentations, observations of these markets, and discussions with vendor representatives. So in round one, if you look at the workplace infrastructure of these markets, in round one, we saw that only 29% of vendors reported access to toilet. Just 27% had access to any form of shelter or shade, and only 12% had access to clean water. And most importantly, women vendors report lower access to toilets and shelter. Out of the 17 markets studied, we look at the structural gaps. It became more clearer. No formal vending zone for 14 markets, which means evictions remain very common. 12 out of the 17 markets were located directly on footpaths, making them highly exposed and insecure. All 17 markets had no municipal water access. 15 had no municipal water access, which means that vendors must purchase water, which increased their daily cost. 3 markets had no toilets at all. Out of the 17 markets, 12 had paid toilets, and only 4 had toilets that were usable for women. And 9 markets, vendor had installed their own shade structures like umbrella, tarpaulin sheets, because none was provided or available. So why this infrastructure mapping matters is that, it tells something very critical about this research. Climate vulnerability is not about, just rising temperatures or heavy rain. It is also about infrastructure neglect. So infrastructure mapping sort of allowed us to connect climate exposure with the everyday working conditions. And what we see clearly is that inadequate infrastructure is increasing climate risk for street vendors in Delhi. And so with that, having moved from the broader overview, context and methodology into the substance of the findings, I would now like to hand over to Shalini, who will take us through the results of our research. Thank you.
I have to press here? Sit
Yeah,
here.
this.
Sit here.
No.
Yeah. Sit here. You want to sit there? Okay, so again I want to begin by thanking those who participated. Seva Delhi, women members of Seva Delhi were part of the survey as well, and they are a very unique group of vendors doing recycling of clothes, and some few other vendors, as well as vendors who are associated with Jan Pehal. So survey findings, I'm not going to overwhelm you. You have the policy brief, but just a couple of findings I want to present over here because I think they have an important bearing of what we're going to discuss today. Also, just keep in mind the infrastructure mapping that was presented just now. So this is the work conditions in which these vendors are working in when they experience this kind of heat. So this is the workplace. Public spaces are their workplaces, and this is the kind of poor public spaces in which they are working with extremely limited infrastructure. So the first one is what we are saying is what we see is so here the green one is round 1, which is when we went before it was hot, a baseline, which we call baseline. The yellow one here is showing green. Yellow one, and the orange one is during the peak months. So what we see is that 96% of the workers saw lower demand, which means lower footfall. There were less customers coming in to buy to the market. 90% vendors reduced working hours for various reasons, including heat and low footfall, and 72% reported losing stock due to heat damage. Remember, in our sample, we have food, non-food vendors as well, and within food, we may have cooked or uncooked food. So what it shows is a direct financial erosion for vendors who are already operating in a very insecure environment with very thin margins. Then we looked at health impacts and coping strategy. We tried to understand. One was definitely in the 2 rounds, we see a considerable increase in increase in health ailments. The question asked was, did you visit the doctor in the past month? And the response multiplied several times when we went in during the heat. And please remember that there may be instances of discomfort and poor health where you don't visit the doctor. So this is only documenting when you visited the doctor. And then in terms of coping, we asked if they had borrowed money, and in the first round 37% said they had borrowed money in the past month, but that really increased to 81%. So debt seems to be increasing and borrowing seems to be the coping mechanism that we see. Naturally, there's a gender disaggregate over here, and debt increased more for women than for men for various reasons. Also, one of them perhaps could be that they are borrowing from informal sources, so and are unable to, their income is also not enough for them to be unable to repay. I also want to say that in the health there may be care responsibilities, increase in care responsibilities for women, which further has an impact on their economic activity. So that's the gender thing. Evictions and harassment were the other questions that we asked, and as you can see, it's not less. 42% were reporting increased harassment even before the heat set in, and 25% were saying increased evictions. But that really increased during the hot months, and heat-related hardship was, as it is low income, etc. So the financial strain is further sort of dramatized or further exacerbated by the evictions that happen, and do remember that social protection for this group, any kind of protection, is lacking. I'm not going to present here, but we asked one question. We wanted to keep the survey short. We asked one question on whether they had ration cards. And the reason why we asked ration cards was because we feel that is the basic denominator of any kind of welfare measure that they should have. And 60%, 60 odd percent, I don't remember the exact number, but 60% said that they had. But which means that 40% didn't have, which means that it could be, so even the basic welfare measure is not reaching, despite we are saying one card, one nation, and many other schemes that we have. And also, we have seen during COVID times that ration card was one of the ways in which we were able to identify the most vulnerable and also get some support to them. So it just shows a picture of great financial strain and lack of any kind of social protection, and evictions really harshening the impact. Early warning systems also we asked, and what we found was fewer workers were getting early warning systems. But I think this sample may be a little bit skewed because we went with organized workers who are working with empowered organizations. So early warning systems were subsequently, even as we were doing the survey, and we'll talk about it in the later sessions, were really upped as the heat came up. And so actually if you go to vendors who are not organized, maybe it would be dramatic. So what we see is the vendors face a web of precarity, informal work, informal place of work, hostile governance, limited social protection, gender inequalities, all of them coming together. And added to it is what Rituraj presented are the infrastructure deficits, and which reinforce these precarity. So coping and adaptation strategies have also costs, and also need infrastructure like water, etc., none of which is either available or freely available. And the costs that the vendor is incurring in coping strategies at an individual or at the market level is never factored into the climate finance discussions that happen. So let me just move to the policy recommendations. So first, we feel that what has come out here is that prioritize urban infrastructure and inclusive governance. So improve basic infrastructure. There are several government schemes which talk about, free water, sanitation, etc. Maybe that is something that can be really targeted for better infrastructure, water, sanitation, electricity, and some of the costs that are incurred by the workers can be reduced. Now, if you remember, if any of us who have been to the market in India, one of the coping strategies that vendors, cooked and uncooked, use is using a lot of water, and using that bori and covering things and all. Now, in the absence of water, and as Shantiji said, she's buying water, drinking water for herself for 20 rupees a bottle. It's really eating into even the coping strategies then become very limited. Harassment and eviction forces you to go to unsafe, very poor places to vend. So infrastructure and provision of services, and then develop inclusive urban planning and policy framework which designs cities, which sees public spaces as places of livelihood, which when talks of climate resilient cities also talks of informal livelihood in public spaces. And none of this is possible if the worker participation is not ensured in these dialogues and design and implementation. In WIGO, we say the workers, on behalf of the workers, nothing for us without us, and that is the principle that we are also following. I talked a little bit about PDS and government this thing, but basically what came out was that the social security was patchy. So strengthen social security coverage and stabilized incomes, which have a major impact on the workers. One is, of course, that better and portable. Many vendors are migrants. Better and portable protection coverage, new extension of existing schemes, new plans, programs that can be introduced. For instance, income support and extending PDS. So during the heat months, whether the PDS, the government nutritional support can be enhanced or made little targeted towards coping with the heat. Maybe it could include a toolbox for coping with the heat. So very specific recommendations are written there. Income support, acknowledging that it is a loss of income, that it is not just a health crisis, that it is a livelihood crisis, and building, whether it is in terms of some kind of microinsurance or the PM Swanidhi scheme, which gives loan to the vendors. Can it be converted into some kind of a loan, climate loan program? We have to think on that. Innovatively use the existing mechanisms to think of that. And of course, as I said, affordable credit, including climate-linked credit products. And finally, addressing overlapping vulnerabilities. A study shows gender and age is another layer of vulnerability to this group. Policy and engagement, some thoughts. I think the Street Vendor Act is really an empowering legal framework, and here is where we think all of us can come together from labor, urban, climate, is to use this, leverage on this policy framework to design vending zones which are climate resilient. And in the subsequent sessions, we will be presenting models of a climate resilient vending zone for all of us to deliberate on. And then we will also present an advisory on heat for the municipalities, which will also be discussed here. Heat is not going to wait for our workshop or discussions. There is an urgency to extend coverage, and I think now as we approach the hot months, we have to get to it very quickly at all levels. Also some thoughts on how we should go forward. I think the advocacy should be at 3 levels. At the municipal level, NDMA already has an advisory on informal workers, which is a good advisory, but the test of the pudding is in the eating of it. So how is it going to be implemented? That is something that we have to think about as we go forward, build on it, and how to ensure bottom-up adaptation strategies, how to include the voices of the workers. And it's important to do it at the municipal level. We may be talking at the policy level, we may have advisories, but I think at the municipal level, it needs a multi-pronged approach, from capacity building to inclusion of workers to SOPs at the municipal level, at the market level, etc. At the city and the national level, I really feel that we need new advocacy spaces and alliances across disciplines. By that I mean not just labor, but labor holding hands with urban and holding hands with climate, with gender. So alliances across disciplines, but also at different scales, worker-led, technical support, so we need an alliance which is looking at comprehensively addressing the issue, which includes both workers and specialists, scientists. We will have some of them in the subsequent sessions, but I think the emphasis, as Dharmender ji said in the opening remark, is to build these kind of alliances, find spaces to build it, and align with the policy, and keep scanning the policy spaces to understand where to go in the existing space, and also to leverage and demand and ask, advocate for newer interventions. At the global level, the climate is much talked about, but there is relatively less on informal spaces, informal workers and climate. And even when there is work about informal workers, street vendors is one of the groups that is talked about, but relatively less. I think this conversation has to be strengthened with evidence, with experiences, with capacity by both the worker movement and the academic research organizations, and ensure that the global policy discourse captures livelihood impact, and with all its nuances, sectoral, gender, locational variations. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you. मैं शांति जी के लिए जल्दी से हिंदी में 5 मिनट में बोल देती हूँ। शांति जी, हमने एक शोध करा था जिसमें हम 500 आपके जैसे लोगों के पास, स्ट्रीट वेंडर्स के पास गए थे, और हमने पूछा था कि गर्मी से क्या प्रकोप होता है, और लोगों ने कहा, जैसे आपने उस फिल्म में कहा, वही बात को 500 लोग ने आगे बढ़ा के बोला कि खरीदार कम आते हैं, काम हम कम कर सकते हैं, खर्चे बढ़ जाते हैं जैसे पानी का, और कोई सुविधा नहीं है जैसे पानी, शौच जो आपने बताया वहाँ पे, वो आपने जो फिल्म में कहा वही हमारे रिसर्च में भी निकला है। तो मैं आपके साथ ये शेयर करना चाहती थी।
Thank you so much for the presentation of this report. I think it brings out very important challenges where we need to think collectively, as you rightly said. We need to look at how different stakeholders can be brought together, because these heat waves are no longer, episodic climate events. They are now more structural, more intensifying and posing risk to workers and to workers' safety and health and income. But also we need to understand that, as you said, these street vendors are selling food, they are selling products, they are selling services, and if we really closely look at who are the purchaser of these services, food items, they are other informal workers, or there are workers who are working in enterprises nearby or in construction sites. So it's not just about the workers, street vendors, but who they are also serving. The entire supply chain of labor is dependent on the street vendors and also the local community. So it's a question where we need to look at the entire labor market together to be able to actually ensure that the people who are really working at the lowest bottom of the pyramid and who are forming part of this important chain, which other workers, other informal workers, other workers who are low paid, as well as local enterprises, local businesses, they are using these services, and of course the local communities. When we look at from the ILO perspective, the issue of occupational heat stress falls under occupational health and safety obligations, and all of you must be aware that in June 2022, right to safe and healthy working environment became a fundamental right. What it really means is that even when countries have not ratified the ILO conventions related to occupational health and safety, they still have a moral and ethical responsibility to actually provide incremental support to all workers, including the informal workers. So this was not a core labor right earlier, but now it's part of what we call as fundamental right. So India, also being a member of the ILO, has to actually implement occupational health and safety for all workers, whether they are covered by an employment relationship or not, and whether they have a particular law related to health and safety for informal workers or not. It's still the obligation of the member countries of the ILO to do that. And there are two ILO conventions which fall under this, occupational health and safety core conventions. Every core labor right has two core conventions. So one is Convention 155, where it talks about the responsibility of the employers. Now, many times street vendors are also being employed by other contractors, or other, where the owner of the goods can be someone else, and a worker who's paid on daily wage or piece rate wage would be actually selling the product. So in that case, C155, which is the role of the employer, is important, which talks about what the employer needs to do. But then there is another convention, which is Convention 187, which talks about national preventive safety and health culture and continual improvement through national policies, systems and programs. Now, unfortunately, this Convention 187 is still not ratified by India, but many countries also, they focus more on industry, more on sectors which are more visible, but forget about the informal workers, forget about, workers who are working from their homes, who are invisible or very visible workers, as Charlie was saying, the street vendors. So when we work on national policies on occupational health and safety, which falls under C15 or C187, we need to look at how do we address issues of informal worker through the national policies, through the national systems and programs to accommodate the needs of all workers. And one more thing which is also very evident from this research is that we have standard preventive universal principles to look at heat issues, and they're pretty common, when you're working with people who are expert on dealing with heat strokes. But what we also need to understand is that these universal principles cannot apply universally to everyone. There needs to be sector-specific, task-specific adaptation that needs to be done. Just to give you an example, if we are talking about agricultural workers, they are more exposed to high solar, they have high solar exposure, and then there are seasonal peaks, there are dispersed work sites. Many times workers, if you look at plantation workers or other agriculture, sugarcane workers, they have to cut a specific amount or pick specific amount of leaves, for example, to get paid for that particular day. So there is a lot of incentivization on piece rate wages, which actually makes the workers do more work. Or similarly in the construction site, they have different kind of exposure. And when we look at street vendors, specifically, the example that was being brought here, that there are no toilets, there are no shades. The simplest coping mechanism, which is drinking water, is expensive. Now, even if I drink water, I need to use the toilet, and if there is no toilet, then the simple thing that I as a woman would do, not to drink water. So if you actually see, the reports of the ILO and WHO on heat strokes, you will find that kidney diseases are one of the most prominent diseases because of heat. And most of the time, heat warnings are given during heat wave period. But if you actually see the data, it is actually exhaustion due to excessive heat over a continuous period of time, which is more dangerous than the heat wave period itself. So many times workers are exposed, if they are cooking on the street with a tandoor and they are continuously exposed to continuous heat, they will have more challenges and problems compared to workers only exposed during the heat wave period, where warnings are also issued. So we need to look at both the things together. Heat waves are important, peaks are important, but exposure to excessive heat is also important. And especially from the perspective of gender, you were talking about gender and age. if you look at women, the women have higher percentage of body fat and they have lower aerobic fitness, which basically means that their body temperature rises much more quickly than men and tends to stay higher, which causes more damage. And most of the street vendors, when they sit, if they're not drinking water to cool themselves up, you can imagine what could be the impact. So what I'm trying to say is that universal principles for addressing heat issues are important, but we need to also look at what kind of sector the workers are working in, what kind of exposure they have, what tasks they are doing, what age they are, what gender they are. So it's important to look at this in a totality and not just, have more customization. Many times we also speak a lot about PPE, like shelter or having a shelter or rest periods. But if you look at the occupational health and safety guidance, we need to follow the hierarchy of control. So hierarchy of control basically means that you first need to remove the heat hazard. Now, in many cases, we cannot remove the heat hazard, heat is there. So the next step is, how do we actually have engineering control? Can we change the environment in which they are working? Or if we cannot do that, can we have administrative controls? By administrative controls, we basically mean, can we have the markets early morning and late evenings? Allow the workers to actually stay longer during the night period, or allow them to start their market vending much earlier, so they're not exposed to the heat period during the peak heat time. So first is elimination. Okay, we cannot eliminate, so that we understand. Second is engineering. Can we have shelters where workers can be under a climate resilient shelter where they can work there? Or administrative control, allowing them to work when the periods are cooler. And the last one is basically the PPE. PPE protects only the worker, not everyone around. And PPE sometimes are, not breathable. They are heavy. So normally we also take off, these PPEs if there is excessive heat. So there's no design innovation also in PPEs, and I think that's where we need to look at it. I remember I was in Sri Lanka, and there was this worker who was actually trying to break the coconut shells in a machine. So he was throwing the coconut shell, and the coconut shell would break in the machine. And he was in peak scorching heat. He was wearing a helmet, a scooter helmet. Can you imagine a worker 8 hours wearing that helmet, sitting on a high, chair? He couldn't even get down for the toilet because you have to continuously throw the coconut into the machine, and for 2 hours he's sitting with this whole, because if it removes the helmet, then the coconut shell can hit his head and he can get injured. So we really need to see what kind of work people are doing, what kind of PPE they need, and need to design them accordingly. Some of the lessons that we've learned, you also spoke about heat insurance, and also looking at different measures related to heat. We also found that it should be a worker-centered program. As you rightly said, you need to talk to us if you're designing something for us. So I think that's very important, and the preventive principles need to look at how to customize and adapt as per the needs of the workers for whom this is targeted. And also sometimes, as I said, they focus, many of the insurance products focus on heat waves rather than the exposure of the worker to excessive heat. So how can we bring that conversation together? And we also found that we need layered and continuous triggers. So for example, if the heat has gone up continuously for 2 days, immediately we release the insurance payment so that the wage loss can be compensated. We cannot wait for 15 days to release the payment because everyone lives day by day, whatever they earn is what they consume. So it needs to be layered, and of course we need to keep the gender lens in mind, because women, during the heat period, they cannot sit for longer time. They have increased care responsibilities. People get sick during that period, because of excessive heat or rain. So their care work increases, their income reduces, So how do we look at gender issues, especially in these insurance and programs is important, and of course looking at the grants and loans, can we have these climate resilient grants is important. ILO has this just transition principles which looks at how do we move towards low carbon economy, and it's very important that in these principles, when we are transitioning, doing the transitioning, when we are making national policies, it's very important to look at the voices of the workers, have a social dialogue with employers, workers, government, but also multi-stakeholders who are who should be part of these conversations. And it should also look at how do we focus on the fundamentals, this is occupational health and safety as a fundamental right for all workers, irrespective of whether we have occupational health and safety laws for informal workers or not. By virtue of India being a member of the ILO, they have to look at it in an incremental manner, and of course social protection, insurance, and also looking at how all these workers, street vendors are operating in a labour market. But sometimes we think of labour market only as industry or formal enterprises, and we forget that the economy is also built up because of the home-based workers, street vendors providing food to other informal workers. So all these chains are linked together. So we cannot think of labour market policies without taking the issues of street vendors and informal workers. And I think for any kind of climate discussion, street vendors and voices of the street vendors must be included. I mean, it actually also makes sense for the government, because if you look at the occupational health and safety data, most of the people think about accidents. But out of the 7,500 people who die every day because of occupational health and safety issues, only 1,000 die because of accidents and injuries. 6,500 die because of occupational diseases, which we are not thinking about. The things that we are talking today is all occupational diseases where countries don't even have a mechanism to actually record it, because once you record it, you can also think of preventive strategies. And I think we need to structure our conversation around that. So that will reduce our public expenditure and also, save 4% of our GDP, which can be used for social protection. So I think with that I'll end. Thank you, Shalini.
So thank you, Bharti, very much. Thank you. We have with us a special guest, Mr. Ranjan Vora from National Disaster Management Authority. Very welcome, sir. I would like you to address the gathering now.
Good morning to respected delegates sitting in the dais, all the representatives from the different ministries, organizations, including the post organization. I am Ranjan Vora on behalf of National Disaster Management Authority. Actually, my director was supposed to be here, but due to some urgency, I am just replacement of my director. Looking into the subject of street vendors and the climate justice, it seems to be quite impressive sort of an initiative as an organizations like CSO. I'll just give you a few of the highlights what National Disaster Management Authority, looking into this particular hazard, is a slow onset of disaster, and how NDM is taking this agenda is one of the important agenda across India, and also liaison with many of the international organizations like there are organizations like GIZ who's also working in this sector. And as like ILO has already been there in support of the policy level support at the government level. In NDMA, we have taken heat as one of the hazard in terms of the mitigation planning. There are different vertical within NDMA. Many of the projects, including the issues like urban flood, heat, extreme heat event, that has been dealt by the one of the division, that's a mitigation. So government has already taken heat as one of the important agenda to carry forward all the perspective in terms of the planning process, including the development projects. Now coming into the structural initiative, what has been initiated by NDMA, probably some of the CSOs also been involved by the districts and the states. One of the foremost initiative we have started since last year, like we have 23 states which seems to be quite vulnerable in terms of the, including the heat hazard. So that's one of the steps we have taken out at state and the district level, because there are different layers of policy level interventions within the state and the district. So we started with the implementation of the heat action plan. This is one of the important area. Probably when we talk about the heat action plan, again, it's a decentralized process, like starting from the grassroots to coming up the national and the state level. So where I see so organizations like you, and probably you have a greater role to play, when we talk about a plan, we need to have comprehensive and integrated plan. So that is the first, I'll suggest as a part of, looking at the policy perspective. I'll request whoever in terms of the involvement at this particular agenda, probably at the districts and the grass, you try to involve with the district administration, because heat action plan is a dynamic process. It has to be done annually. So there's a lot of scope within the organizations to raise some of the interdisciplinary issues, like this is a very critical subject. We talk about a section of a vulnerable community, that's a street vendor, right? So they come from a different periphery of the society, like there is multiple stakeholders, including the urban development department, there are other departments like social justice and social welfare, right? These are the crucial department. Probably we need to be very comprehensive, when you make a policy at the districts, in terms of the action plan, which has to be very categorically specified, like in terms of the gig workers who work in those scenarios. Probably we have to look at the perspective in terms of the heat rising, right? There are cities like Delhi. In fact, we have a pilot project under the support from GIZ. That's a project called Increase. We're coming out a very comprehensive planning in terms of the Delhi heat action plan, looking into the very specific category. There are structural mitigations plan, there are non-structural mitigation plan. We are also talking about some of the structural mitigation like cool roof planning, right? So these are the adaptations being started. So I think there's a lot of coordination effort need at the district level when we talk about a very specific category of the street vendor. Again, that's a sustainability. There's a component of how to be sustain those their effort, right? When the heat is rising at the temperature of 45 and beyond, probably it's a very difficult scenario, right? It's a global event, right? If you look at the European context, also probably UK also have a similar problem in the recent days. Rising temperature of 1 and 2 degrees higher. That's also lead to another secondary hazard. When something goes in a heat, probably there are new emerging challenges like urban flood, right? So there are other consequences. Cities are also having a heat problem. They have the other problem like humidity. It's also a consequence of other heat-related, physical threats. So these are the emerging challenges. Probably we have to deep dive into the challenges very contextually in the region, in the very specific micro planning level in terms of the planning process. Starting with the heat action plan, we tried to do it at 23 states across India. That has been started since last 2.5 years. I request all of my colleagues from the CSOs try to engage with those state authorities or the relevant department. Like every state, they have the state disaster management authority. Probably that will be the platform where you can look into being involved in this in terms of the mitigation planning. Of course, national level, we try to have a lot of collaborative networking with the CSOs and the other ministries, because this is one of the cross-cutting issues. We need to involve the Ministry of Housing, because we talk about the shelter, right? When the workers like street vendor, they go for their livelihood in terms of the undefined area, probably in a heat resourcing of around 47 or 49, we need to have some structural retrofitting in those localities. So these are the critical areas we need to be really deep down into the planning process. Again, ma'am has also highlighted very important aspect of the early warning, right? We know temperature when rises, there are critical agencies like, there are government agencies like IND, or there are different players also who gives early warning. So how this information is going to that particular section of the vulnerable community, that's again one important area. Looking at the, probably all of us know the weather pattern, right? We go into the apps, we can know the next 7 days weather forecasting scenario. So how this message being transmitted to the community level, right? So this is the another area probably we can look into those perspectives. Probably organizations like us, we are also disseminating in a different communications through different channels, but we need a lot of engagement with the civil society organization. So these are the critical area we need to be really involved in terms of the coordinations. giving the seasonal and remotely early warning mechanisms to those particular segment of society. Now coming into structural and spatial strategies, we have initiated a cool roof initiative. That's one of the agenda being carried out. All the metropolitan city, including Chennai, has a very demonstrated pilot project which has been initiated by one of the UN organizations like UNEP. So I request all of you to just go to the Chennai interventions in terms of the cool roof strategy. This is one of the base model. We are also trying to replicate one of the base model to across other states of India which is having the similar problem. So I think that's one of the interventions probably we need to be carried forward. Of course, public awareness, we already know that's how the current day interventions in terms of the message goes to the different channel, right? We have the messaging system, right? So like in NDMA, we have the common alert protocol. That's one of the messages, when disasters are going to happen in somewhere in terms of the early warning, we disseminate to large scale of messaging. So these interventions probably also be roped into the heat action plan. If something in that scenario, probably how CAPE will be utilized in those scenarios. So these are some of the public awareness. Maybe some of the local social media also plays a crucial role in terms of the awareness on those scenarios. Of course, the informal sector, like we are talking about the street vendor. So how this sector, in terms of a specific guideline, can be developed both at a national level or maybe in a very crucial, like there are other ministries. So we need to be look at the SOP, right? We need to be a very specific guideline to reduce that sort of an impact to the, especially the street vendors. So this is the area I probably, because you have been working very closely with those scenarios, right? We need to build up those learning and need to have a very comprehensive SOP. So this guideline, of course, when we make a district level micro planning in terms of the heat action plan, there are certain guidelines, but again in terms of the disseminations that need to be rope around to that particular vulnerable section. So again, this is one of the greater area we are looking into in terms of the policy level decisions. And of course, this they're very critical sector in terms of the medical preparedness. Of course, when heat at the level of 48 or maybe around that scale, so there are a lot of health hazard, right? So what is the initiate actions can be done with the support from the public health emergencies, right? Of course, like district, like director of health services, national level we have the ministry. So the ministries are doing well, but again, we need to have a very comprehensive action plan. That again, it has to be localized effort. So I think that the medical preparedness is one of the greater area. At NDMA level, we are looking at a very comprehensive, inclusive plan preparations in terms of the National Heat Action Plan. Now coming into very specific research study, I just wanted to give you some of the important aspect of this issue. There's an institution called Postman Research Institute, and there's an Indian agency, Center for Social and Economic Progress, CSFP. I think they are doing a tremendous job in terms of the looking at the double grants of the heat action. India is again rising scenario in terms of the other hazard, including we have the glacial lake because it's happening because of the climate change, right? So heat is a part of one of the agenda. This organization is taking for their study. The climate change is creating as a double crunch for many of the economics and the society. So I think that's one of the research study they have taken up and they are going to publish it by October. Try to have those sort of an engagement with those economic research institutions because they give you very comprehensive strategy in terms of the probabilistic figure. If temperature goes beyond 50, what will be the scenario? Including the other segments of the this sector, informal sector. So this study will give us a broad idea in terms of the planning process. So we are also trying to have those input from those academic research institutions. There's a German-based organization. I think they are doing a tremendous research work in this area. And of course, at the national level, being as one of the apex institution in terms of the disaster preparedness, prevention, in terms of the relief and rehabilitations, NDMA, we are always looking forward to have a collaborative engagement. So I am not a technical person in terms of the mitigation planning. I'm from a different division altogether. We are looking at the international collaborations in terms of the disaster risk reduction effort. At NDMA, we have also engagement with bilateral MOUs with the partner countries and the multilateral interventions. In India, we have the leading in terms of the BIMSTEC, one of the multilateral organizations, Bay of Bengal Multi-Sectoral Technical Economic Cooperation. So BIMSTEC, we have a different working areas. Like we have the disaster management, one of the core area. Within the disaster management, the climate change adaptation is one of the core area of action plan, looking at the 7 member states, member countries within the neighboring of India. So we are developing a very comprehensive climate action plan with the support from the MOFCC. So these are the greater, perspective in terms of how the climate change, in terms of the, global warming, or in terms of the heat action plan. What are the immediate action in terms of the short-term interventions for 3 years? Within the perspective of India and beyond that, we are also taking cross-learning exercise. Like ma'am has already highlighted Sri Lanka, what's happening in terms of the, that particular worker. So probably some of the best practices we can also cover from those specific, member state. If it's replicable, definitely we are trying to do in terms of the, model project. So I just giving you a highlight in terms of the bilateral cooperation, in terms of the multilateral effort. And I just concluding here on behalf of NDMA, we are looking forward to have that sort of engagement. Although I'm not prepared in terms of the technical perspective, very specific to the informal worker, but we think it's a very important agenda. We need to look at it holistically, whether in terms of the social perspective or economic, parameters. Again, risk is one of the area we're talking about parametric risk insurance. Of course, we are also working with a risk financing mechanism. Probably this one of the specific sector we really need to be work it out. What will be the mechanism if they have lost in terms of the 2 days? What will be the quantum of relief, or maybe in terms of the compensation that has to be worked out. And we look forward for some of the suggestive guideline from ILO, because ILO has a comprehensive model in terms of the risk mechanism transfer. So these are the area we are really looking for those sort of an engagement. And I welcome all of you for this brief discussions. Probably this is a new area for me, and whatever I learned today, I'll try to give it to my seniority so that we can have a comprehensive workout on the action plan for the coming years. Thank you so much. It's okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, first for finding the time and then giving very concrete suggestions. And as we move towards the hot months, I think there were some 2-3 issues that, with your permission, we could continue to dialogue with you, including, whether it's dissemination of early warning systems or medical preparedness at the local level, because the heat will come. And the structural retrofitting, when you're thinking of structural retrofitting, cool roofs, cool stations, maybe markets could be something. We are happy to produce SOP, we are happy to collaborate for dissemination, and we will be seeking your appointment with the recommendations that comes out of this deliberation. So thank you again very much for finding the time. And now may I invite Mr. Dipender Kapoor from NIUA to give his comments. Wherever. You have a mic there.
I have to hold it.
Thank you, Shalini, and also everyone in the audience, as well as NDMA who is there. From NIUA, which is the National Institute of Urban Affairs, we work with the ministry, we are part of the ministry. And for me, this is important because last year I had attended another Viego event on domestic workers, I think it was. Home-based workers. So that was also on heat. And the idea was that how do we look at heat for workers. Now we are talking about vendors in this case, and the perspective is usually missing. So for example, I come from the water background, so I can understand heat and water quite well. And as a researcher, I have done myself led studies. We did one big study in Sangam Vihar in Delhi, where we highlighted actually water waste, stormwater is it's like a city within a city, and you have to deal with it in a different way by reimagining Delhi's water supply, not by trying to do retrofitting and fixing. Why I'm saying this here is because I think something like that has to also be done with heat. NIUA and the ministry fortunately has now in the last, in fact just 10 days back, initiated work on urban heat. And there is the climate cell. Isha Kalia was supposed to be here, she could not come, but an initiative has been started for 12 cities to look at heat resilient initiatives. It's like a pilot project for 12 cities. If it works, it may get scaled up to 100 cities. And we have 2 summers, this summer and the next summer, to work on this. And therefore, from NIUA, we were also hunting for information, ideas, what needs to be done, how it can be done. So we were in touch with several of organizations. UNEP, we were talking to our own activist friends, so that what we can do in this intervention doesn't become a techno-managerial intervention. And therefore we are very happy ILO, and we would like to engage as soon as we can with WIEGO, ILO, NDMA. With NDMA, in fact, NIUA is anchoring the Delhi Urban Flood Mitigation Program. Why I am saying that is, again, we were happy that NDMA took up a nature-based solutions perspective rather than a drainage perspective, which you see is the other perspective of urban flooding. It is not about flooding, it becomes about water conservation. And it's reuse of treated wastewater. So these elements from NIUA we were able to bring in, and we were happy that NDMA owned it up and they promoted it. Coming back to this urban heat, or rather my own experience, I joined NIUA, I was with NIUA for 5 years till 21, and then I rejoined after a 1-year teaching stint at Shiv Nadar and 2 years with CSE. In July, I joined back and for the climate cell work here. And what I found here was that the way it's such an important field, but the way the work has been going on is quite ad hoc. So, for example, the first initiative which NIUA took in 2021 was setting up a climate smart cities assessment framework as a nudge for cities to think about climate and climate action. And therefore, this climate smart cities assessment framework worked on 5 sectors: energy, water waste, greening, solid waste, and mobility. 5 sectors it tried to find indicators to nudge cities to do a voluntary assessment of their progress or commitment or projects or initiative, and it was a 5-star ranking framework, very similar to Swachh Sarvekshan, I would call it, because I come from the water sector. So the idea was that you show action in these 5 areas which are under the municipal domain. So what is not in your municipal domain, you don't do. But here also, if you see, heat and flooding is in that sense a next step. These 5 are all sectoral things. So from there, the focus shifted to climate action plans, for city climate action plans. And as this very good collection of recommendations which are here, which we will use for our heat project, one talks about the heat action plans remaining guidelines and not legal binding mandates. The climate action plans also were, in a way, I would say, very preliminary steps towards identifying climate priorities for cities, and therefore, then there were heat action plans, as NDMA is doing. So there are various organizations doing different things, and then, of course, we have city development plans. And just as Ms. Birla was mentioning, when I come from the water sector and sanitation sector, PPEs were also introduced in the water sector as an afterthought. That's now we have to also work on PPEs, because we worked on sanitation systems, treatment technologies. Now let's talk of PPEs. And I was with the Gates Foundation sanitation program that time, and a lot of work went on infrastructure creation of decentralized STPs, PPEs, and city-wide inclusive sanitation, CWIS, came at the very end. So there are very few organizations and there is very few good work out there, and I think it's very important to integrate all of that into the HEAT initiative. So there is all this experience which is there. So don't start with PPEs. That's what that should, in fact, you should not have a PPE if your system is good. So the idea should be to get rid of PPEs rather than to make PPEs as an intervention itself. Under the HEAT resilient actions for the cities, we see the challenges that most cities make it a hotspot mapping exercise. So when we were talking to people, and even our own team was, lost in this issue of what to do, where to start from. So level of detail 1, level of detail 2, and Aarti is here. So we were all, grappling with this issue that if you have to do a HEAT assessment for a city, what you should do, and how much you should invest in a IT-based, a satellite-based system, and how much it should be based on ground truthing. So I think the 12 cities we have got to work on provides us with a good opportunity to assess and test some of these methodologies, how much we can actually rely on these IT systems and how much we can organize as consultations, or maybe just start with some priority interventions and learn from it. And those priority interventions should therefore look at people and livelihoods rather than look at interventions per se. For example, it's very tempting to work on lake rejuvenation. And I again come from the water side, so it's very easy. You can say, and you can spend a lot of money doing all that work. But if you work on street vendors and livelihoods, it may be very difficult to actually do something on the ground in a short project, or it may not exhaust your budget. So both the things are very real, and for people like us who've spent about now nearly 35 years in this field, we know from our experience that good work will always be challenging to do. And just to end by saying that all these points are really very relevant for us. We are taking them with us, and we will try to incorporate it in our work. And we will try our best to ensure that our program doesn't become a techno-managerial intervention and just doing a set of projects and ending with a report that normally happens. And we would really welcome an opportunity and to interact with and learn from everyone. When I was looking, so in our Climate Center for Cities, one of the first things I've done in the last 6 months is we said, okay, let's come out with 3 or 4 good orientation modules, because where do you start from? So there is enough data and everywhere. So my team was telling me, let's work on adaptation, let's not work on mitigation, because mitigation mein kuch hota hi nahi hai. So, and there is no work actually in mitigation. So, but we said, no, let's talk about mitigation, because climate change is about mitigation. Adaptation, we have lost the battle. We are just trying to survive in that case. So the first module we worked on was adaptation and the climate science and, mitigation, climate science and mitigation. So therefore, that is something I think which is very important. Even if we work on heat as a thing, we should talk about mitigation. Without that, it will not work. Second one in adaptation is where we were talking of vulnerability and what adaptation, where to work. So I think there, heat and flooding don't feature in so prominently. What features is projects. So that's that's a very, seducing kind of way to go. So we had a consultation in July on our program and initiatives where there was the session on climate finance is very popular with donor, and it ends up becoming projects. And again, people and heat and flooding are somewhere lost because they are not projects in this case. And therefore, on climate finance, we had to do one of our modules because that was being so much talked about. So it becomes restricted to instruments of financing, green bonds, and for different kind of interventions. So again, it is for flooding, heat, and something heat. Sorry, wasn't there, but water, waste. These are the kind of interventions which are normally done. The fourth area, so we did one on mitigation, one on adaptation, one on financing, and the fourth on institutions, climate institutions. Why I'm saying this is because this is being promoted nationally, climate cells. Now, climate cells are coming up in different cities, states, but there is again no clarity. Where will they be housed? What will be their structure? What would be their mandate? So everything is just open in terms of a climate center or a climate cell. So for example, Bangalore has a climate cell focused on lakes and water bodies because that is their challenge. Bombay has one on flooding because that is their major challenge. But I have yet to see a climate cell on heat in any city which is focused on that, and there are so many cities facing that challenge. So these are good inputs for NIUA also from here, that when we engage in all this and we are able to influence or make a 10% improvement in what is coming to us in this. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and also for identifying opportunities for knowledge sharing. So we'll be very willing to share or whatever experience we have within India and globally. Now I want to invite Shanti Devi. शांति देवी, आपसे अनुरोध है कि आप आके 2 शब्द वहाँ से भी बोल सकते हैं और गर्मी के प्रकोप से आपके काम पे क्या मुश्किलें आती हैं उसके बारे में, और क्या आपकी मांग है, आप क्या चाहती हैं सरकार से, अपनी संस्था से, इस शहर से, उसके बारे में बोलिए. इधर से बोलेंगे, यहाँ आएंगी. So I'll do the translation after she finishes. Rituraj, can you help her with that? Rituraj?
Hello?
बोल, आ रही है.
मैं शांति देवी बोल रही हूँ, प्रोटो लगाती हूँ. ये परेशानी आती रहती है. कभी पानी की परेशानी, कभी पुलिस की परेशानी, कभी बिजली की परेशानी, कभी कमेटी की परेशानी. जब से पटरे बैठे जब से परेशानी चल रही है. मैं प्रोटो लगाती हूँ, गर्मी में भी खराब हो जाता हूँ और कोई सुविधा नहीं है इतनी सही हमारी वहाँ. बहुत परेशानी हुई है. पानी बहुत दूर दूर से लाते हैं, उसको पास से लेते तो 20 रुपए की बोतल भी हो. पानी की कोई सुविधा नहीं है. पुलिस आ जाती है तो माल को फेंक देती है, उठा देते, भगा देते हैं वहाँ से. और ये तो काफी सालों से बैठे हैं, फिर भी बैठने नहीं दे रहे हम लोग. बहुत परेशान करते हैं. कमेटी आती है तो गाड़ी को उठा कर ले जाती है, तो माल को उठा ले जाती है, फिर दोनों भागते फिरते हैं. अब ये क्या समस्या बताएं आपको, यही समस्या चल रही है सारी. मेरे 2 बच्चे हैं, मेरा बेटा खत्म है, बहू भी है, उनको मैं पालन पोषण कर रही हूँ. उन्हीं के लिए मैं जी रही हूँ, उन्हीं के लिए मैं कमा रही हूँ. मेरा पोता है 17 साल का, पोती होगी मेरी 14 साल की. उन दोनों को मैं, उनके माँ बाप खत्म हो, माँ को हो गए 12 साल, बेटे को हो गए 4 साल. उस समय उनको पालन पोषण कर रही हूँ। और मैं यही करना चाहती हूँ, बस हमारे कोई सुविधा नहीं है वहाँ, ना पानी की सुविधा है, ना कोई छाए की सुविधा है। वो छाता लगाते तो गर्मी में हमारी बहुत बुरी हालत हो जाती है, एकदम धूप पड़ती है, पसीना पसीना हो जाती है। कोई छाए की सुविधा नहीं है, कोई सुविधा है नहीं वहाँ से। परेशानी परेशानी आ रही है। मैंने दोनों बच्चों की जिम्मेदारी उठा रही हूँ, उनको कैसे पालन पोषण करूँगी, क्या करूँ, इसलिए लगा रही हूँ, धूप में मार रही हूँ, तप रही हूँ, आग में भी, जैसा मौसम होता है उसी में रहती हूँ। बारिश में भी लगाती हूँ, धूप में भी लगाती हूँ, ठंड में भी लगाती हूँ, गर्मी में भी लगाती हूँ।
शांति शांति जी, आप क्या चाहेंगे गर्मी के समय में, किस तरह की सुविधा आप चाहेंगी?
गर्मी में सुविधा ही चाहते हैं, कहीं छाता बढ़िया सा मिला है, सब ठंडक मिला है, कहीं और अच्छी जगह, कोई पेड़ पौधे कोई लगाने वाला नहीं है वहाँ, तो वो छाए में बैठे हैं, कोई सुविधा कुछ भी नहीं है। मांग तो मेरी क्या है, मेरे बच्चों की उम्मीद है, बस मेरे बच्चे कामयाब हो जाए, पढ़ लिख के, और मैं मांग क्या करनी है आपसे, कोई ऐसी मेरी मांग नहीं है। आपकी मर्जी है, जो भी मदद करना चाहते हो कर सकते हो, मैं अपने मुंह से कुछ नहीं बोल सकता। बच्चों के लिए कर रहा हूँ और मेरे को कुछ नहीं चाहिए।
ओके, थैंक यू।
मैंने अपनी जिंदगी जी ली, बच्चों के लिए जी रही हूँ, क्योंकि मेरे बच्चों का भी कोई सहारा नहीं है, अभी छोटे कम उम्र के बच्चे हैं, मेरे अलावा उनका कोई नहीं है।
धन्यवाद शांति जी, कुछ और कहना चाहेंगे?
और अब कुछ नहीं कहना चाहती, क्या कहना चाहूँगी, मैंने बोल दिया आपको।
अच्छा, मैं अंग्रेजी में सबको बता दूं आपने जो बोला?
हाँ, बता दो।
So Shanti Devi highlighted the fact that she is a single woman-headed household looking after 2 grandchildren, and she talked about the various problems that she faces with water, electricity, lack of shade, and harassment by committee and by police. By committee, I think she means municipality, and by the police, which is very constant. The second thing she talks about, that food gets bad, the water is so far off, we have to pay for it, takes time, so there are time costs, etc. And when the police and committee harass them, there is loss of goods that they are trying to sell. That she highlighted very poignantly, and also very poignantly said that there is no choice. I have to look after my family, so I have to work irrespective of the season, irrespective of harassment. When I asked her what would you want this summer, and many thanks to all the panelists, now may I invite Aran to please come and give his reflections. Would you like to sit down?
Thank you very much, Shani. Thank you for having me. We talk about heat, but of course we just came out of yet another crisis, and I don't think we should call it crisis anymore because they happen all the time, right? I think so. You were referring to that as well, right? We need to think about those factors. I'm here. We don't say this in this professional gathering usually, but because I'm here because I'm a fan of the work of WeGo. It was wonderful to hear the work that a long association with WeGo, including with SEWA, which includes an immersion program of which now 20 years ago, I have to say, Shani, we're not getting any younger. And WeGo's, SEWA's and the other organizations' commitment to raising the voice of marginalized groups, particularly informal workers and particularly women, is phenomenal and so important. I want to thank you for carrying out this study, continuation of showing continuously the relevance of the work, the unique position that you take. Again, raising the voice of people. I now work. I work still work for the International Development Research Center, which is one of the collaborators in the global in this study. Another global study, some similar in COVID, had similarly such important results. I now work for IDRC on a climate change adaptation project, and I see, and I think the colleague from NIUA was referring to that, to see that there is an increased attention to inequalities in how we look at the impacts of climate change. But I'm here to say it is not nearly enough. I think even the words of vulnerability to climate change. And I came to this point and I come back to my very small health issues that I have. When I was here in 2 years ago in the summer, wonderful colleagues phoning me up and said, "Ian, how are you doing in 50 degrees Celsius?" I live in Canada where we prefer -20 to go skiing, and I said well, thank you very much, very nice that you called, but you have to stop doing this because I am perfectly fine with the heat and on the course. Here's my air conditioning. I get into a car to get, and this is really important for the kind of advocacy that you do. People like myself, many people, except for very few people, can protect themselves against that. And I felt like I am not vulnerable to climate change, right? I mean, I'm not denying climate change. Let there be no misunderstanding. Climate change is absolutely real. The impacts are real. But I am not vulnerable to climate change. I can protect myself from the impacts of climate change. So marginalized groups, 80% of people in India working in the informal sector. Now, of course, they're vulnerable to climate change, but they're primarily vulnerable to the lack of institutions that is supposed to protect them from the impacts of climate change. That's a very long sentence, but to think how we think about vulnerability is really important. And again, that's where Shalini, your work is so important, because you highlight that specific voice, and as you say, there's no solutions for women without the women. This continues to be very important. I see that in the international debate, and I think it's absolutely critical to all the policy responses that we see. We're coming back to who feels the impact and who doesn't. I'm a student of history, and I know that issues became central to policy, often when it impacted the people that were in power. And that's the great challenge that you have here. The worst impacts are felt by the people that are voiceless. Right. This is not a climate change issue. This is a structural issue, and again, therefore, this work is to elevate those voices is absolutely critical. And with that, to say also, and it's wonderful to have the colleague from NMA. It's and that has to be working in partnership. That has to be work. We need to co-produce the solutions. We have to make sure that solutions for groups are with groups. But they are about urban services and the fact that, we see that in our program around the world, we see local authorities that do know about the problem. They're always, I'm sure you'd also look, there's a scarcity of money to do things, but partly because of that, local authorities are looking for effective solutions. And what we do know is that the co-produced solutions tend to be, they necessarily co-produce because those impacts are so local to specific groups, but also tend to be more effective. And that was the last thing I wanted to very much encourage you, and we'd be happy from our work to work with you as well, to see how we can leverage, to make sure that we, as you leverage, articulate those voices and develop the partnerships that lead to those necessary solutions. But mostly just to say again, a wonderful, such important study, congratulations and thank you for having me.
Please. Thank you. I think we need to close the session. We are running quite late. I know, Naga, you have a question for Bharti, and I'm going to connect the two of you over coffee. I encourage everybody else to seek out the speakers. And so thank you so much to the panelists for being here, for very good inputs. for giving a direction. So the idea is not to do research. The idea is to take the evidence to worker movements, to policy change, to also conceptual changes of how we address issues of climate or heat. And I hope in this workshop, this is the first step that we are taking towards that. Thank you.